The United States makes the UN work when it wants it to work. And that is exactly the way it should be, because the only question to the United States is what's in our national interest.
My name is John, and the International Criminal Court is back in session. It is June 20th, 2026, and before I start today's video, I once again want to apologize for not making a video in a certain period of time. I went on a lengthy vacation that went on a lot longer than expected, and also, I got kinda lazy too. So, yeah, I apologize. Now, getting away from all of that, we are going to discuss the situation on the ground, and it is safe to say that there's a lot to talk about. Now, first of all, I want to mention the attacks on Moscow, the capital of Russia, also its largest city. The Ukrainians recently, I think a week or so ago, struck the city of Moscow. I think they struck like one of its large oil refineries somewhere in the city. I don't know exactly where, but they have struck the city of Moscow with the use of drones, and it has caused a huge uproar within the Russian Federation. It has brought many to question the ability of Vladimir Putin to outright win the war in Ukraine. Not just in Donbas, eastern Ukraine, but all of Ukraine. And the fact that Ukrainian drones were able to struck the capital of Russia, despite the fact that it's supposed to be heavily protected, I mean, it's quite humiliating for Vladimir Putin. But also, it doesn't help that within Ukraine itself, the Russians have been losing ground within the Dnipropetrovsk and Zaporizhzhia regions, which has been, of course, a PR nightmare for the Russian army, because they worked so hard in 2025 to gain the territories that they gained, and now most of those gains have been reversed by the armed forces of Ukraine. And yeah, so the amount of PR losses that the Russians have been taking as of late has been quite, let's just say, bad. That's all I can really say on the matter, because, I mean, what do you want me to say that hasn't really been said about the Russians already in 2026 when compared to, like, 2025? They will have their moments of total fuck-ups. Fuck-ups so bad that people will laugh at them for, like, maybe 1 to 2 weeks. That's just how things go. And then, all of a sudden, things return to being boring, and that's that. Until, of course, the next big event that makes Vladimir Putin look like an absolute incompetent, clownish retard. But with that all being said, until the next event occurs, nothing ever happens. In the Middle East, though, something absolutely did. Apparently, the war between the United States and Iran is over. An agreement, or should I say a memorandum of understanding, has been signed by both heads of state. However, it appears that Israel is not being a cooperative party to the agreement. They are still occupying parts of southern Lebanon and are also striking Hezbollah targets too within the country. And because of that, I wouldn't be too surprised if the MOU falls apart, because if it does, then oil prices are definitely going to go back up. Though right now, they're quite lower, pretty much around the same level when the war started back in March of 2026. But I honestly don't know if it's going to hold forever. So we'll just have to wait and see what happens there. But until then, let's get back to Ukraine. So yeah, as I mentioned earlier, things are not looking good for the Russians in the Zaporizhzhia region. And to first start off, we're going to talk about the Stepnogorsk area. The Dnieper group is continuing to take L's, even though they mostly have stabilized the situation outside of the town of Kamensky and Plavny. The Russians have lost some ground in the village of Mali Shishbaki, and they have also lost control over half of Shishbaki 2, which is located, I think, southwest, or no, just west of the strategic town of Orekhov. Stepnogorsk is mostly back under Ukrainian control, even though these commie blocks and the southern road here are under Russian control still. But otherwise, though, the central main area of Stepnogorsk, along with all of Primorsky, if at least around like 90 to 95% of it, is back under Ukrainian control. So, big loss for the Russians here, though I am expecting them to try again in the coming months due to the fact that the Ukrainians are probably not going to be here for much longer. And why that is, you'll know soon. In the Gule-Pule direction, the Russians are continuing to advance on the strategic crossroad village of Olmenek. However, these advances have been slowed down, most likely due to the fact that Ukrainians are continuing their counteroffensive in this direction. According to Syriac maps, the Russians are holding off the Ukrainians right at the doorstep of the strategic junction town of Zaleznichne, and have recaptured the strategic village of Herk, or Gurk. Verkhna Tursa is pretty much contested again, though Russians are still holding on to the majority of it. Vozdvi Zivka is still under Russian control despite Ukrainian counterattacks. And pretty much everything outside of Ternavate, along with, I guess, Ternavate itself, everything here is back under Ukrainian control. The Russians are also struggling to hold on to the areas that they gained in November and December of 2025 within the Zaporizhzhia region. Rivnopilia is apparently in a gray zone, though we don't know for certain if the Ukrainians are actually there. And Syriac has put Dobropasovo back under Ukrainian control firmly, though Vostok on Telegram suggests otherwise, because this is also due to the fact that there's a large scale evacuation of these settlements right now within the Dnipropetrovsk region, which could suggest that either the Russians have broken through in this area or the Ukrainians are building up forces there to double down on their counteroffensive efforts in the Zaporizhzhia and Dnipropetrovsk regions. So yeah, I keep an eye on that place. And then they have also retaken the village of Novoselivka and have also retaken Iskra, also known as Andriivka Kalepstove, along with also clearing the vast majority of Ivanovka and also taking back a significant chunk of Zeleny Gai. Ukrainians have also attempted to retake Zerka and Pirobine, but so far we don't have any reports of successes yet in this area. Tolstoy, Khrushchevsky, and Novokatsky are all in a gray zone, with no confirmation of either side controlling it. Alexandrorod and Voskresenka are also in a gray zone at this moment. Now, going to the Novopavlovka Dnipropetrovsk direction, more bad news. The group of forces center for the Russian army have lost complete control over Novopavlovka, despite their best efforts to hold on to most of the village that they have controlled for over 1 to 2 months. It looked like the armed forces of Ukraine were about to lose Novopavlovka to the Russian army, but instead, they kicked out the Russians completely from the town. If I have to guess why Novopavlovka is still holding on for the Ukrainians, well, it's kind of obvious, because as long as Mazova here is holding for the AFU, then the Russians can't really do anything in this area. And that leads me, of course, to the Pokrovsk, Dnipropetrovsk direction. So, as all of you know by now, Ryapol and Kolona Mazova are contested right now by the Russian army, mainly the group of forces center. The Russians need control of all these settlements here in order to basically unlock Novopavlovka. In other words, to capture it. And as far as I'm concerned, it looks like the Russians have begun an assault to take the town of Mazova, which is a strategic area which goes not only from let's see here, from Pokrovsk, but it also eventually leads to Prozyana, which in turn goes to eventually Pokrovsky down here. which is a key crossroad town within the region. And also, it eventually leads to Vasilkivka. And I think somewhere down the line, it can lead you to Pavlograd. And of course, how can we forget Dnipropetrovsk, or Dnipro, as many Ukrainians prefer to call it. So far, though, we have no reports of any further successes by the Russian army, but I'll keep you all up to date on this area as things progress. Though I will say that going into the true dog days of summer, and in fact, by the way, it is the first day of summer here in the United States, if not the whole world, it is expected that the Russians will probably advance further into the Dnipropetrovsk region from Pokrovsk, which was contested for most of 2025, and I don't expect Ukrainians here to do any better as issues for them on other areas continue to unfold. Now, going a little further up north, the Russians are continuing to advance outside of the cities of Pokrovsk and Minograd, and so far we have no progress from either side. Even though Beletsky is pretty much split down the middle, we can assume that the Russians hold the initiative at this time. As all of you remember, last year, the Russians, as I've said in one of my older videos, they were not looking too good in the Dobropila direction. I think they controlled something like this or something, and they even had Zoloty Kolodiaz and Kutryev Yar, but they lost both of these areas to the armed forces of Ukraine, and a lot of these too, as well. But now the Russians are in control of the initiative north of Pokrovsk, and it wouldn't surprise me if they try to do an assault on the city of Dobropila. But I feel like that's going to have to wait because of some news, like really good news that is, to the east. And let's talk about it. The Russians are whooping ass in Konstantinovka. I mean, I don't know what else you want me to say. Dovabolka and Roskishne, even though they're in a gray zone, I think there's more evidence to suggest right now that they are under complete Russian control at this time. The armed forces of Ukraine are being pushed out of these villages by the Group of Forces Center, or the Group of Forces South, or YUG. And as far as I know, it seems that from the village of Pavlovka and Novopavlovka, not to be confused with the one in Dnipro region, it looks like the Russians are going to begin an assault on the city of Druskovka here, right south of the city of Kramatorsk, which is the Ukrainian administrative seat or provincial capital for them in the Donetsk region. Because in 2014, as all of you remember, the Russians stole Donetsk from the Ukrainians via their proxy armies, the Donetsk People's Republic, and because of that, they had to move the capital of Donetsk region to Slavyansk and the Kramatorsk. I think apparently just Kramatorsk, but yeah, this has been their provincial seat ever since, but it doesn't look like it's going to hold on for much longer because a lot of bad news in this direction for the Ukrainians. So after they lost Dovabolka and Roskishne, or around the same time that is, they have also now appeared to have lost majority of the city of Konstantinovka to the Russian army. The Group of Forces YUG, and I assume the Group of Forces Center, have not only managed to surround the Ukrainians within the city, but they have taken control over the majority of Konstantinovka. The southern commie blocks here, which I do believe was the main defensive barrier for the Ukrainians, was taken easily by the Russians. And also just recently, the Russians have finally broken through from the northern direction and have seized control over most, if not all, of the central part of northern Konstantinovka. And yes, the Central Rada building within Konstantinovka has fallen. So if we want to go by law, like de jure, Konstantinovka has already fallen to Russia. Now, outside of Konstantinovka, the village of Stinky, I'm not joking, that's really its name, is finally being contested by the Russians, and as far as I can see, I think what's going to happen is that after Konstantinovka falls, Mykolaievka, Chervone, and Podlitsky will fall easily to the Russians without much of a fight. The Ukrainians are going to withdraw from this pocket here, right side of the town of Chazov Yar, which was captured by the Russians in 2025, like the summer of 2025, that is, around the same time as Toretsk, completely. And what will then happen is that the Russians will have all this high ground here that will give them the firing advantage over the town of Olegzhivo-Druskovka, and perhaps also Kramatorsk and Druskovka as well. Markove is firmly, for the most part, under Russian control, though I think they're still dealing with some Ukrainians on the hills here, but otherwise, it's basically like under their control. And then going to the areas that are adjacent to the Donbas Canal, which goes through the city of Artyomovsk or Bakhmut, the Russians have broken through in this direction. They have seized control over the village of Yurkovka, and in a surprising turn of events, they have also seized majority control over Rai Alexandrovka. Rai Alexandrovka is one of the crucial defensive points for the armed forces of Ukraine in the Slovyansk-Kramatorsk direction, and with the fall of this particular village, it is pretty much safe to say that the Russians are on track to heading for the outskirts of Slovyansk and the Kramatorsk probably by the near end of summer, if not maybe next month or so. I mean, who knows? I am expecting the Ukrainians to put on more of a fight as they get closer to the city of Slovyansk itself. However, something tells me that the Ukrainians might be considering of giving up Donbas entirely. Not just because the Russians have the military advantage here in this area, but the fact that also the U.S. Under Donald Trump are really pressuring the Ukrainians to just give up Donbas. Like, it is a lost cause. They are going to lose the province to Russia, and that, yeah, they should just surrender it willingly without that much of a fight. And in return, they will get a ceasefire deal that would spare the rest of Ukraine to the Russian onslaught. Now, let's continue on. So the Russians have seized the outskirts of Kryvaluka here. I think they call this Novo Piskonivka right here. Piskanovka. And then going up north, we have some very surprising news, and it is fantastic news for the group of forces west, or ZAPAD. Now, as all of you know, the group of forces west, or ZAPAD, is one of the more controversial parts of the whole Russian army in Ukraine, and they have been known for screwing up a lot. For not holding flanks, for not really putting up a good fight when it matters the most. But it seems right now they are starting to regain their edge and also the initiative on the front. So yes, guys, your eyes are not deceiving you. The city of Liman is in deep, deep trouble for the armed forces of Ukraine. Some maps suggest that Liman is 90% or so under Russian control, but Syriac, however, here is giving the Ukrainians another chance, keeping most of Liman in a gray zone. But to be honest with you guys, I think it's kind of copy, and I think by this point, the Ukrainians most likely no longer control around 3/4 of Liman. Apparently, there have been geolocations as close to the central Rada itself in Liman, which is right here, this building. And there have also been geolocations of the Russians, too, in the Kami blocks here in southern Liman. If I were the mappers right now, for the most part, I would just suggest turning all of Liman into a gray zone. Well, at least all of this is. The Liman Lake is clearly also not under Ukrainian control at this point, so I don't know what Syriac is thinking. But what we can definitely assume right now is that the Russians, somehow, someway, despite losing the northern flanks of Liman, which is the village of Krapovka here, They have managed to break through into the city, and it looks like they're probably going to take control of it sometime in July. If that happens, then the Ukrainian counteroffensive in the northern area here will all be for naught. And then, so Svyatogorsk will be in big danger of falling to the Russians. So, what I'm expecting them to do after Liman is then they're going to push towards the Sovietsky Donets River here, the Donets River, and they're going to try to, take Svyatogorsk, and then they'll try to cross the river that would go to Slovyansk and the Kramatorsk. But what I think is going to happen here is they're going to do an advance that's done by both group of forces, ZAPAD, and group of forces, YUG. Like, they would cover this part of the Donets River, and then ZAPAD would cover this part of the Donets River so that they wouldn't have to cross it, or at least they would make their crossings easier. Because they got to capture both sides of the river if they really want to seriously consider taking Slovyansk. They have to. There's no other way to do it than that. So if things go as planned for the Russian army, I'm not going to be too surprised if they're probably in the outskirts of Slovyansk as early as August or September of 2026. I don't think they've been close to Slovyansk, like this close, since I think July or August of 2022. It's unbelievable. But yet, here they are. So now, let's go to the Olsko direction. Or should I say the Kupiansk direction as a whole? Because a lot of news has been coming out of here, and once again, it's mostly, if not all, good news for Russia. Now, as you guys know, the Ukrainians put on a stubborn resistance in this area here that is adjacent to the Olsko River. And I think they've been doing these advances from the village of Sankovo. However, I don't think their efforts are really going to mean anything in the end, because apparently Glushkovka, right here, even though it's under Ukrainian control according to Suryak, I strongly disagree with him. I don't think there's any Ukrainians left here. And for that reason alone, I think the Russians control it. And I think there's even geolocation supporting those claims too. So, I don't consider Glushkovka to be under Ukrainian control at this point. And I also don't think Novo Sinovo is under Ukrainian control either. I think it's all a gray zone. Like, neither side has any firm control over, I guess, both of these villages. But time will tell going into July. And then we got some shocking news coming from the town of Kiev-Sharovka. And once again, it is great news for Russia. They have not only taken these private single-story housing areas along with these farms here, but they have also broken into the commie blocks, which essentially is like Ugledar here. I mean, it's very similar to Ugledar. And according to some pro-Russian mappers, especially Military Summary, they suggest that the Russians have already captured this much of Kiev-Sharovka. And I think, as you can see, according to Suryak, he has most of the town under Russian control, which is excellent news for them. And then outside of Kiev-Sharovka, Suryak has also colored completely Kurilovka and Podoli under Russian control. It is firmly under Russian control, along with Kucherovka, and as a result, the armed forces of Ukraine are all but on their last leg in this part of the Kupiansk direction, and as a result, they're probably going to have to withdraw their forces. If you ask me why the Ukrainians are suddenly losing here, it's because ZAPAD, after losing most of western Kupiansk, they just finally decided, you know what, we're just going to try to take the eastern side of the river first, which they should have done from the very start in 2025. But also, I think a good chunk of Ukrainian forces have retreated or have been called up to other parts of Ukraine where they're needed, like in Zaporizhzhia and Dnipropetrovsk. And as a result, it has resulted in the collapse of this front. And because of that, the Russians now have the initiative. And they have also now seized complete control, too, of eastern Kupiansk, which is another big win for Russia. And I wouldn't be too surprised if sometime in July, Kupiansk-Vizlove will be completely captured by Russia. And as for western Kupiansk city itself, it's kind of a mess here still, but what we can definitely say for sure, according to recent geolocations, is that the Ukrainians still have control over some parts of northern Kupiansk. However, the central part is mostly a gray zone, with the Russians still being in the area of the central Rada building and also being in the presence of the commie blocks here within Western Kupiansk. And also, there's geolocations also confirming that the Russians have recaptured the village of Kendra Shovka, and they're also about to recapture the village of Retkovka, if not already. So yeah, a lot of good news for the ZAPAD group. And then going into the area here that is like outside of, let's see, Krasny Pershe, Russians are about to contest for Petro Ivanovka and Novo Vasilovka. I think they've captured some fields here, and they're contesting for all these right now. I have them, Novo Vasilovka under Russian control already, but Syriac, though, thinks it's in the gray zone. So, yeah. Maybe he's a little more credible than me, but that's definitely up to you guys to decide for yourselves. Nothing much happening on the bordering areas here, but however, in the Volchansk direction, we also got some happenings. Vilcha, after it was recaptured by the armed forces of Ukraine earlier this month or so, they have lost control of it already. The Russians are about to recapture Vilcha, and I think they have also regained the upper hand in Simonivka as well. Grafsky was recaptured by the armed forces of Ukraine, along with the majority of Staritsia. And also, Verkna Pisarovka is also under Ukrainian control too. But other than that, though, I think the Russians have the upper hand because they stopped the main Ukrainian attack into Volchansk, which they've controlled now for, I think, 6-7 months now. And once they recapture Vilcha, I don't think the Ukrainians are going to be able to break into Volchansk again. It's all but inevitable at this point that the offensive on Billy Kolodiaz is going to happen, and I think they're going to attack from these directions here, though it's going to be quite challenging, considering that Ukrainians will probably have all sorts of FPV drone units looking to snipe the Russians before they try to even enter the area. But that is why I think they're going to try to cut through these villages here, and then they'll try entering Billy Kolodiaz not just from the west, but also from the south. And maybe from the north too, if all goes as well. But yeah, not too much news here, but it's looking a little more promising for Russia. And then in the main Kharkiv direction, or Kharkov direction that is, the Russians are continuing to break through into the strategic village or town of Kozacha-Lopan. They entered Kozacha-Lopan earlier this month, I think long before I made this video, and probably around the same time when I made my last previous video, which was on the 1st of this month. And as far as I know, the Russians have advanced this far into Kozacha-Lopan. Should the Russians capture Kozacha-Lopan, the next big settlement will not be until, I guess, perhaps Slatin and also Bezruki. But then they would already be close to the suburbs of the city of Kharkiv right here. I think Derhachi is like the biggest suburb outside of Kharkiv city, but I don't expect them to try aiming for Kharkiv this much. I think what they're going to try to do is, after they take Kozacha-Lopan, they're then going to try to take all these areas here, try to connect this bridgehead that was originally aimed for Lipsy and connect it with this bridgehead here. And once they're able to do that, then they're going to probably then try to do a push towards Kharkiv from the north, and they'll probably try reaching the city itself by the end of 2026, which, of course, would be a miracle or miraculous outcome for the Russians in this area. Though, realistically, I think they're going to try to take Zolochiv first, right here in the northwestern part of the Kharkiv region, which also is adjacent to Sumy. Now, speaking of Sumy, a lot of good news for the Russians, too. The Russians have not only locked up Myropelia, but they have also recaptured or captured completely the village of Zapsilia here. Syriac has most of this under Russian control, though he doesn't say that it's under complete Russian control yet, but he definitely says that the Russians are winning in this area, and as a result, Sumy City is in bigger trouble than it should be in. Myropelia, by the way, I think was claimed captured around April or May of 2026, but Ukrainians and some neutral mappers, as military summary would say, kind of denied it for a while. But now that this is the case here, I think we can assume that the Russians might be a little deeper than we think. But time will tell if that is the case, because as all of you know, many sources in this war that like to map the conflict are not very reliable and tend to have like their own biases. Now, getting away from this part of the Sumy region, we got the original Sumy direction here. I think the Russians are going to try to connect this with this, and in turn this, which will then turn into a true full-blown front in the Sumy region for Russia, and in turn will be a nightmare for the armed forces of Ukraine to deal with. Now, because the Ukrainians have been getting redeployed to other areas of the front, like in Donetsk region, Zaporizhia, Dnipropetrovsk, and even the Kharkiv region, the Sumy region has been kind of abandoned, or at least forgotten about. And it shows. So, the forested areas here, these forested areas, outside of Pisarovka, Evils Sanke, Kinitsia, and Nova Sich, or Sikh, are all coming under Russian control. All these forested areas, which in turn provides the Russians good cover from FPV drone strikes of the armed forces of Ukraine. Now, if the Russians are able to capture 1, 2, 3, 4 of these villages here, including the village of Krapiv Signia here, then what's going to happen is the Russians will then have a comfortable place to sit on, like right up north of Sumy. But then here's where things get very interesting. Once the Russians complete their recapture of Krendertivka or Krendatovka, along with Khotin here, Sumy City, in my opinion, from the northern area is cooked. Because then the Russians will use these forested areas like they did with the Siversk direction, and then they're going to do it to Sumy like they did it to Liman. They will use these forested areas here as a cover from drones, and then they're going to try to go as far as possible to the village of Stitskovka. And should they be able to capture Stitskivka from Pisarivka, then Sumy City itself will become contested. In fact, I'm going to be honest with you guys right now, and call me fucking insane for saying this, but I wouldn't be surprised if Sumy becomes the first provincial capital in Ukraine to fall before the city of Kharkiv. I know, it's crazy to think about because Sumy is an actually pure Ukrainian city when compared to Kharkiv. Kharkiv, which speaks mainly Russian, is nothing like Sumy. Sumy speaks Ukrainian. So yeah, it would be very funny if Sumy were to fall before the city of Kharkiv. And yeah, that would mean that Sumy would be the first provincial capital to fall to Russia since the city of Kherson in 2022. And that's something I should mention. Since March 2022, the Russians have not been able to capture any provincial capitals in eastern Ukraine. Never. They were stopped by them. The AFU, that is. When they were much stronger, much more competent, and much more willing to take risk and take advantage of the Russian stupidity. It's been that long. So yeah, Sumy is in trouble. And I don't know what the Ukrainians are going to do. Are they going to keep attacking the Russians in the deep south? Or are they going to have to send their men back to Sumy? But then that would mean Kharkiv region would be in danger. And then, of course, Slovyansk-Kramatorsk. And then the Dnipropetrovsk direction. The Ukrainians are very stretched right now. I don't know what they can really do here. And it also doesn't help that going further to the north, the Russians have also kind of broken through in the northern Sumy region. Bachivsk is contested by Russia as of right now. Like, half of it is in a gray zone. And then soon, Tovsto Dube, hold on, let me try to read this. Tovsto Dubove will also be a contested area as well. And the E391 road eventually leads you to the city of Glukov, or Khlukiv. So yeah, Ukraine is going to have to make a very difficult decision. Are you going to try to defend the north more? Or are you going to try to defend the south, the east, the Kharkiv region? What are you going to do? And now, with the recent strikes on the city of Moscow, the capital of Russia, I wouldn't be too surprised if Russia decides, you know what, we're just going to double down on Chernigov and Sumy. I wouldn't be surprised if that happens. Russia is probably going to target Chernigov region in the future, though I don't think that's going to happen until 2027. But what I can definitely say for sure is that they will double down on Sumy. That is a guarantee. And I wouldn't be surprised if in the future, when shit gets to the negotiating table, the Russians will demand control of not 4 oblasts, but 7 at most. Maybe. Sumy, Kharkiv, Dnipropetrovsk. They will demand 3 more at the table. And if the Ukrainians don't agree to anything right now with the Russians, like withdrawing from Donetsk region and such, then what will end up happening is that they will soon lose more of Dnipro, Kharkiv, and Sumy regions, which in turn will threaten their ability to negotiate at the table. And I don't think the next president of the United States, after Donald Trump, will want to deal with this bullshit. We just got off of a humiliating defeat with Iran. And yeah, I don't know if the United States is going to be wanting to want anything to do with this conflict for much longer. And it also doesn't help that midterms are coming up too. So the government is about to be gridlocked. And Trump won't be able to do anything for the final 2 years of his presidency. So yeah, things are not looking good for Ukraine in the grand scheme of things. And as a result, they're going to really have to double down on their support from European countries, which even there is quite polarizing right now because Zelensky and the president of Poland, who really has a difficult relationship with Ukraine because of their honoring of past fascists that collaborate with the Nazi regime in Germany. Yeah, things are kind of falling apart for Ukraine at the moment. Hungary, even though they support Ukraine more now, thanks to Orban being gone, they're still kind of shaky with them. Moldova and Romania are like their remaining allies left. Bulgaria, I think, is gone now completely, so you can forget about them. The Czech Republic is gone. I mean, like, their true allies are the Baltic states and Romania and Moldova. Those are, like, their true allies right now. But Poland, Slovakia, Hungary, they're taking a bigger distaste towards President Zelensky, and I don't blame them one bit. He's an asshole. And he honors people who killed not only his own, the Jewish community that is, but also his dad's brothers and sisters in the Soviet Union. He's literally a traitor. I don't know what else to tell you. He's a traitor. So yeah, guys, that's going to do it for today's video. So tell me in the comment section below what you think of today's updates along with the recent strikes in Moscow. And I'll catch you all later. So take good care of yourselves and bye-bye.